Welcome to Monitoring the Success of Your Efforts, Module 3, Monitoring Plans. This is the final module in a three-part series on monitoring the success of your efforts. During this introduction, you may want to take a moment and adjust the volume on your computer so that you can clearly hear the audio. Prior to beginning this module, you should have already completed Modules 1 and 2 in the Monitoring the Success of Your Efforts series. After completing the first two modules, you should understand the importance of monitoring your efforts and have a completed logic model which shows this process. Before you go any further, I want you to reflect for a minute. Remember your baby steps. Look at your logic model. When you created it, did you clearly define the need you were attempting to address, your goals, short, intermediate, and long term, your strategies in terms of activities and tasks, your desired outcomes or results, and did you decide on which data to use as indicators? This should have been outlined in the logic model, but will be fully specified in the monitoring plan. If you haven't finished all of these tasks, take some time as a team and do them now. If you've got everything you need, then let's move forward. The next step is to create the monitoring plan. A monitoring plan enables you to capture additional information, such as who will be responsible for a specific task, decide on the monitoring questions, make sure that you have a mechanism for tracking program participants, and determine if there is a group of students that you would like to use as a comparison group. While your baseline, which established your need, will give you something to compare against, you may also want to consider having a group of students that you use as a comparison, students that were not in the program or initiative. The monitoring plan also allows you to make sure that you've written your goals as SMART goals. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. We'll go into a little more detail on this in just a moment. The monitoring plan builds on the work that you've already done within your logic model by taking some of the key elements within that logic model, such as the need, the strategies, as well as your goals, and establishing monitoring questions associated with each of those key elements. It also provides details such as the data source and the availability of the data which will be used to address each of those questions. This level of specificity is necessary in order to monitor whether your goals have been accomplished. Your monitoring plan will enable you to chart things out, such as how will you monitor your status? What are your information sources? How will the data be collected and analyzed? When will the data be available or collected? And who will be responsible for the data collection and analysis? Okay, let's begin our monitoring plan. The best place to start is with your monitoring questions. In other words, what are you interested in knowing about your initiative, and what information would you like to communicate to your stakeholders? Your questions should capture the information that you would need to know to determine if your program was successful. Questions that you will always want to ask are, did you meet the need you were trying to address? Were the students you were targeting the ones who were served? Was the program implemented with fidelity? Did the program accomplish its goals? What went well and what could have been improved upon? And were the benefits of the program worth the cost in terms of time and money? You can already see that some of these items were covered in the logic model, while a few items were added. Next, I want to look at a monitoring plan. This example displays only the first four questions from the generic plan that is saved on your resource tab for this module. When you pull that up, you'll see that there are many more questions. We're just dealing with the first four. And any plan that you're going to develop, you're most likely going to have many more questions. So use that model that is saved on the resource tab as your guide. In any monitoring plan, you are going to start with the first column including the monitoring questions. So let's look at some first questions that you could ask. Some typical questions include, what need does the initiative address? What are the expected outcomes of the program? What are the expected objectives or SMART goals? And what resources are needed for implementation? Okay, let's consider the first question. What need does your initiative address? Let's think back to the Miracle Math example that was presented in Module 2, Lesson 3. In this example, this question was covered in the Miracle Math logic model, and it was expressed in terms of the need. So the data showed that approximately 3,000 middle school students scored below grade level on their math EOGs in 10-11. This baseline data should be captured here, and then it'll be summarized again later after the intervention to see if the need was indeed addressed. For your effort, state your need in terms of the data as a way to show that your initiative is strategic and give you a way to measure to what extent your identified need was actually met. This can also be useful if you are seeking funding for your effort and to create a common language between you and your stakeholders. The key here is to be sure that you use numbers specific to your initiative and target group. So for example, if the Miracle Math program was implemented in only 9 schools with 800 students being invited to participate, then you should have, the need should reflect this, and at the end of the program you should be able to say to what extent you lowered the number of students from the 800 targeted who scored below grade level. The next question you'll want to consider is, what are the long-term goals of the program? This question will need to be examined in order to determine if the program was successful. Again, think back to the example of Miracle Math. For Miracle Math, the long-term objectives or goals were the achievement gaps would be eliminated and that all students will graduate on time. So what are your expected long-term outcomes for your initiative? Answering this question will tell you if you in fact have met your long-term goal. The timing of your monitoring as well as the timeline for your initiative will determine when you're able to answer this question. Next, we'll want to consider what the program's objectives are in terms of short-term and intermediate goals. Make sure that you've written your short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals as SMART goals. SMART goals will be reviewed frequently to ensure that you are staying on course. In our Miracle Math example, one goal related to the implementation, which was reflected as an intermediate goal on their logic model, was that 90% of students would attend 80% of sessions offered. Since there were only 5 sessions planned, that means that nearly all the students were expected to attend at least 4 out of the 5 sessions. That seems reasonable, but it does mean that planners would have to see that there was a way to help students make up any missed sessions. Examining the short-term and intermediate goals often reflects fidelity of the implementation of your program, allowing you to see if your initiative failed to meet any of its goals along the way to your final outcomes or long-term goals. Okay, next let's consider a template that you can use for the creation of a SMART goal. This template is also available on that resource tab within this module. This is just one template that you can use to create a SMART goal. The important thing is that it includes all elements. An example of a measure is the percentage of students scoring at grade level. An example of an indicator would be end of grade tests. Okay, so let's look at this template to make our Miracle Math goal a SMART goal by adding a time frame and an indicator. So by June 2012, or by the end of the school year, student attendance, that's our measure, will increase from 70% to 80% of sessions as measured by attendance rosters, and that's our indicator. Keep in mind what makes this goal a SMART goal is that it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Okay, so let's look at each of those elements in our example. So what makes this goal specific is that it reflects what will be measured as well as how. A specific goal has a much greater chance of being accomplished than a general goal. Think about whether you want to change attitudes, build skills, or change outcomes, and with whom? Teachers, students, parents? And what indicators can be used for each of the expected outcomes? To set specific goals, remember you can use the W questions: who, what, when, where, which. A measurable goal covers how much change you would expect to see on what measure. So in our example, the amount of change from 70 to 80% is based on this measure, attendance. Establishing concrete criteria for measuring progress towards the attainment of each goal is what makes them measurable. Goals also need to be attainable. So within our Miracle Math example, we've identified that attendance is important to the success of the program, and both the measurement and accomplishment of this goal are attainable. So this is our goal, 70 to 80%, and this is how we're measuring it. We have to consider whether we have the resources to make this happen. Okay, so realistic. Goals also must be realistic, and realistic goals represent an objective to which you are both willing and able to work. When we look at this goal, 70 to 80%, it appears to be realistic, but again, we would have to look to prior attendance rates to ensure that this goal is realistic. The goal can be both high and realistic, but it should be related to the strength of your initiative. You're the only one who can decide just how high your goal should be. Be sure that every goal represents substantial progress, and that means progress beyond what's typical. Finally, a SMART goal is time-bound. By specifying the time frame here, we made this goal a SMART goal. A goal should be grounded within a time frame. With no time frame, there's no sense of urgency. For more information regarding the SMART goals, go to the Resource tab of this training module, and we've put a PowerPoint presentation that details more information and explains SMART goals. Okay, let's go back to our model. Finally, we need to think about resources. So with our Miracle Math example, the resources that were needed were 2 FTEs, or full-time equivalents, training, software, and tutoring. So you need to consider your resources, whether your resources are feasible. Now that we've established your key monitoring questions and considered how they might apply to our Miracle Math example, it's time to stop and consider your questions. Are there any additional questions you would need to address in order to know if your effort was successful? Take some time now and draft the first portion of your monitoring plan by establishing your monitoring questions. Use the sample monitoring plan that's saved us a resource on your Resource tab within this module as your guide. Additionally, you want to look at your goals again to make sure that they are all written as SMART goals. And you can use both the PowerPoint and the template as resources to accomplish that. You'll need to make sure that you have SMART goals because your measures and indicators need to be established before we can move forward to identifying your data sources. In our next lesson, Module 3, Lesson 2, we will be discussing your information sources and the way in which you will go about examining each question based on your data sources.